Now on Democratic Visions, members of the Minnesota chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace speak out on Israel's treatment of the Palestinian people.
Palestine is the place I grew up, and because I was Jewish, I had a more or less normal childhood. But a few miles away, people weren't having normal childhoods. They still aren't.
Now right there in the background,
Mike Gelfand on the new Viking Stadium and Metrodome fever back in 1981. Here's producer Jeff Strait.
Retired KQRS morning show contrarian Mike Gelfand is writing a book. But Stretch does bust out of his author-only cave from time to time to help Democratic Vision splash vinegar on metro area sacred cows.
There's a live webcam fixed on the construction of the Viking Stadium in downtown Minneapolis. Pretty soon it's going to look like the Crystal Cathedral in California. Not unlike the Lutheran churches and some of the synagogues you see here in the Twin Cities. And it's kind of appropriate because the local boosters, the Chamber of Commerce types, they talk with a religious fervor when they talk about the billion-dollar construction. And of course, don't forget the corporate suites. Hey, who do you think's going to have more concussions, the birds or the players? In 1982, before webcams, the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome cost a mere $55 million to put up. Among those weighing in on the construction of the Metrodome was Sunday Extra, a Channel 5 news magazine. Sunday Extra's Dome reports targeted the manner in which both the Dome and other TV news magazines were hyped and promoted.
Day 37 with John Barnier.
I'm thinking I-Team, Ted Koppel, Nightline, Day 44.
What do you think about the Dome?
I think it's worthless.
Well, if they'd have turned it upside down, it wouldn't have fell.
Groping for an explanation for the Dome's collapse at a news conference on Friday, Dome officials claim that heavy snow and lack of heat contributed to a self-propagating tear in the Dome's fabric. And no one thought the collapse could have been caused by the Dome's ponderous name. This is Dome correspondent John Barnier at the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome.
I'm sure a lot of my millennial pals don't even remember when satire would rear its ugly head on local TV.
The initial concept is to paint the top of the dome brown and then to put these big styrofoam sesame seeds on top of it. So that's basically to convert the dome to a big Kaiser roll.
Futurist Larry K. Hansen heads a blue ribbon commission of specialists assigned to perk up the currently drab look of the Dome site. Hansen explained to this reporter that the commission had to come up with a look which would both attract out-of-state tourists and be in harmony with Twin Cities' cultural standards. The commission's proposal is now being reviewed by city officials. Larry Hansen.
We've also proposed a twin office tower complex in the shape of a salt and pepper shaker, and then possibly another hotel in the shape of a napkin dispenser.
The newly decorated Kaiser Dome would be the first part of a tabletop theme planned for Dome Park.
The parking lots in the entire area around the dome will be covered with Formica.
Hansen doesn't believe the tabletop look will clash with existing downtown buildings.
Well, we already have a start on that. We have the Hennepin County Government Center, of course, which many people say looks like a giant toaster.
Well, I don't know if I'd paint it brown, but I suppose that's the color of the roll anyway, so.
but that was then and this is now. I ain't no John Barnier Dome reporter. But like L.K. Hansen, I used to work at this place. I had a stake in the turf here. Yeah, I covered City Hall, sports, TV. Here's what I knew then and what I see now.
The Star Tribune building's going to be leveled soon. A lot of leads were buried in this building, along with the sports writers who wrote them.
Yeah, here's where the iconic medallions were. There were 6 of them. I guess they were supposed to represent different Minnesota industries. They're gone now. Actually, they're stored in Fridley, along with Robert T. Smith's old whiskey glass and Sid Hartman's old tape recorder. Oh, and Sid Hartman. Yeah, and this parking lot here, it's going to be a park. I don't know if Lucy's going to still be here, but I think if she were to look at all this now, I think she'd say,
good grief. First they make me pimp for an insurance company, and now I'm left to rot in some parking lot.
And in the background there, you're going to see 200,000 square feet of glass pretty soon. You know, that's the glass the birds are going to fly into and die while you're enjoying the game. 3M was supposed to come up with some kind of bird-proof thing. They're going to put Post-it notes on the glass warning the birds to stay away.
Hey, let's take the virtual tour. Look, the sight lines are great. Hey, no lines in the men's room. No peeing in those troughs anymore. No splashback. You gotta love that. Hey, look, the concession stands. Boy, I hope they have those $12.50 hot dogs. Hey, this webcam thing is terrific. Let me go to the close-up mode here. I see something in the background. I'm pretty sure that's Ziggy. He must be inspecting the grounds or something. I hope they got enough beer stands in there, because I'm getting mighty thirsty just looking around. Pretty soon it'll be 2016. I'll be watching the games with pride, not in the stadium because I can't afford a ticket, but I'll be watching, I'll be proud, and who knows, someday we'll win a game. God damn, they got drones here. And I ain't talking about the editorial board. Oh, I got it. It's Wilfie's no criticism zone.
Mike Gelfand accepts comments, roses, and arrows at mgelfand@aol.com. That's mgelfand@aol.com. L.K. Hansen's You Don't Say cartoons are featured each Monday in the Star Tribune. John Barnier is a celebrated photographer, artist, teacher, and author. He lost interest in the Dome after the Twins won their second World Series in 1991.
Honestly, I don't get it. I don't get how we're the fringe, we're the far left, when all we're saying is we stand for apparently the radical notion that Palestinians are people too.
I suspect that a common theme we'll be hearing today is that our solidarity with the Palestinian people and all our work for peace and justice is deeply rooted in our Jewish identity.
On December 13th, Andy Berman was part of a forum on issues about Israel, Palestine, and being Jewish. Andy Berman, welcome to Democratic Visions.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now tell me a little bit about that forum.
That forum in mid-December was held at the time of Hanukkah, a very important Jewish holiday. It consisted of 5 people of Jewish background from Jewish Voice for Peace, our local chapter, who spoke on personal terms of how their thinking had evolved to a position of support and sympathy with the struggle of the Palestinian people for justice.
Local advocacy for change in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza typically sparks passions, but is generally ignored by mainstream media, even when the turnouts are enormous.
I mean, the newspaper is so anti-Palestine and for Israel.
The December forum at the Southdale Library in Edina was intended by its sponsors as a modest correction to the larger slanted media discussion. That informed correction, and others like it, may again be muffled when Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses our own Congress.
But small voices often have very high merit. Jewish Voice for Peace panelists included Andy Berman, Alan Malkus, Marissa Katz, Mark Trias, and Minnesota Chapter President Ilana Rossoff. Andy, is it your position that being Jewish naturally moves towards a peaceful resolution of the conflicts between Israel and Palestine?
Yes, Jeff, that's certainly true. Jewish history, and we are very proud of it, is filled with instances of identification with the cause of the oppressed. Moses led the Hebrew children out of bondage in Egypt thousands of years ago, and throughout our history, the struggle for justice, the struggle for freedom is basic. On a personal level, when I grew up in the 1950s and 1960s, it was absolutely clear to me that Jews were expected to support civil rights. We're expected to support the rights of labor, to be active in the peace movement, and we did. And out of that heritage, we speak out today against the oppression of the Palestinians.
Now, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in New York City. I was born in Brooklyn and I lived in Queens. There was much interest in the civil rights movement. There were many labor struggles, and Jews were at the forefront of it.
Your co-panelists at the forum also talked about their backgrounds.
My name is Marissa Katz. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia. I was born and raised there. I'm a Southern Jew. I grew up in a Reformed Jewish household with a proud Zionist history and background. My paternal grandfather actually was very much involved in smuggling arms in the 1930s to the Irgun, the Jewish terrorist organization in Palestine fighting the British.
My name is Mark. I was born in Russia. I became an Israeli citizen when I was 5. I left about 8 years ago and I haven't been back.
Hi everyone, my name is Alana Rossoff. I'm a recent transplant to Minneapolis from New Jersey. My dad is a Reform rabbi in northern New Jersey. We had a kosher home.
My name is Alan Malkus. My family was originally from New York City. My grandparents were all active in the Garment Workers Union. I grew up in a non-religious, somewhat anti-religious household. When I was a kid, we attended a Reform synagogue, but mostly just for show, I think.
The seedlings of my social justice framework were planted in my adolescence through my upbringing through religious education, and this notion of tikkun olam, which people translate as repairing the world, is this religious concept that through creation the vessels of the world were shattered, and that it's the work of people over time to kind of mend those breakages and create a whole world again.
When I was in the 4th grade, my friend and I stood in front of an elevator to his home back in Haifa. I don't know what we were talking about, but I remember asking him, why don't we just drop an atom bomb in Gaza? My friend was the child of comfortably middle-class left-wing Zionist Jews. My friend's dad worked for Elbit Arms Company. His grandfather was a concentration camp survivor. Mark, he said, don't be silly. Gaza is way too close. We'd get all the fallout.
My parents insist that I go to Hebrew school and be bar mitzvahed. It was critically important to them, strictly for social reasons, that all 3 sons get bar mitzvahed. I object. I want to play stickball after regular school instead of going to Hebrew school. My wonderful parents are hypocrites. On Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, my parents play golf. It was my job to wrap the golf clubs in a blanket to carry them out to the car so the neighbors wouldn't see. In any case, my parents won the battle. I was bar mitzvahed. It was 1960. The rabbi was surprised to see black faces in the audience. They were friends my father had invited, and I felt very proud of that, much more proud of that than the bar mitzvah itself.
I went to a very exclusive high school in Haifa called the Hebrew Reality School, which meant that it was a science prep school that taught in Hebrew. It was an old labor Zionist school, and our campus had been used for military training by the British, the Haganah, and the IDF. We were always finding old bullet casings, especially out back by the Monument to the Fallen. It was a big basalt wall built like a bunker, and it was engraved with the names of the school graduates and teachers who had been killed in the wars. It had been built in the 1940s, but there was still plenty of room for fresh names.
My Judaism is the Judaism of the shtetl, the Judaism of the immigrants, the Judaism of the New York garment workers. At my family Seders, the discussion was about the civil rights movement. This was the 60s.
My worldview was very much focused not only on Zionism and being Jewish, but being Jewish in America and in the American South, where I was surrounded largely by white Republicans. I was very aware from an early age of my Jewishness.
I kind of took it upon myself to learn more about international human rights issues. I was really compelled by the Save Darfur movement in South Sudan, the oppression and genocide of one ethnicity, and started to get more information from sources like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch.
I don't know when I had turned into a leftist, but by the time I was 16, when they call you for your first set of physical and aptitude tests ahead of conscription, I no longer had any enthusiasm for combat duty. I told the uniformed young woman who interviewed me that I'd rather serve in intelligence or something because I didn't want to kill anybody. We had an arts teacher once who always had short, neon-colored hair. There was a rumor that she was related to Leon Trotsky. She took us to watch Pink Floyd's The Wall at the Cinematheque in 9th grade. I'm telling you this because in 10th grade, when we were all getting called for the checkups, the school showed us this animated short film on how you become a soldier. It was supposed to be very exciting. And the climax of the film was at the end, after you went through the medical and bureaucratic process, they showed this conveyor belt with all sorts of people on it, some with long hair or short hair, some with earrings and piercings, dressed like punks or goths or preppies or whatever, all different. And then there was this thing like a press that went thump, thump, and on each of them, and they came out looking exactly the same, a crew cut and a green uniform.
I went to Hebrew school, I went to Sunday school, I was bat mitzvahed, and in the proud Jewish tradition of going to summer camp, I went there for many years, and then the next step after that was going to Israel. That experience, the high school in Israel program, was, in retrospect, very effective brainwashing program. It was a lot of fun, and it was great to see the country and all the historical sites, but it was a very intense program trying to convince us all to make Aliyah, and which is to immigrate to Israel and become citizens.
My mother took me to my first anti-Vietnam War demonstration in 1967. So I grew up, I went to college, participated in that movement, participated in the first Earth Day.
I was very lucky. I went to Oberlin College in Ohio. The first course I took, my first semester, was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I was thinking to myself, well, I know I'm right. I know Israel's right, but I am curious to hear the other side.
After I'd come here to go to graduate school, Frank Hornstein, who's now a state representative, Frank and I got to know each other. He started a group that later became Jewish Community Action, and I got involved in that, and I started feeling a little more Jewish. I started participating in more having seders and lighting candles at Hanukkah again. And I got involved in a humanistic Jewish congregation here in the Twin Cities.
We all, at the very beginning of the course, introduced ourselves, and we said we went to Israel and we know the right path, and here we are. And after reading through the materials, at the end of the semester, we went around the circle again, and every single student, including myself, said, I've changed my mind. One book in particular opened my eyes and changed my mind, and it was Sarah Roy's book, The Gaza Strip, The Political Economy of De-Development. She's a political economist from Harvard.
The political and economic failures of the past 2 decades, in particular, are astounding.
When it was under Egyptian control, it was basically underdeveloped and stayed underdeveloped, but when it became under Israeli occupation after the 1967 war, the Israeli government had a deliberate policy of de-developing the land, which was to, in essence, destroy the economy. The point of destroying the economy was to make the Gazan population completely dependent upon the Israeli economy so that occupation could never be undone.
Around 1982, with the massacres in the camps in Lebanon, I became aware that I totally disagreed with what the Israeli government was doing. And a year or so later, I read a book by Noam Chomsky, who was one of my idols. And I read this book called The Fateful Triangle, Israel, Palestine, and the US. And it totally educated me about the real role the US and Israel were playing, the real reason why peace negotiations got nowhere.
During the summer of 2006, when Israel was bombing southern Lebanon again, I was finally getting information from a human rights organization that was showing the disproportionate numbers that we see in every Israeli attack. I remember talking to my dad about it and being like, what is this about? How do you, why are there 700 people killed when there were, only 70 Israelis killed? That's so massive. And something he said to me was, well, Amnesty International has been known to be anti-Semitic. And I was like, that was one of the first moments of like true cognitive dissonance where I was like, something's wrong.
It's 1962. I'm 15 years old. Grandma comes over to our house to watch the Adolf Eichmann trial, which was being broadcast live on TV. She is glued to the set. I see the back of her neck is red, and I see tears on her cheeks. I ask my mother why Grandma is so upset, and Mom explains to me what happened to our family in the Holocaust. I'm a college student in New York City, passionately involved in the Vietnam anti-war movement. Lyndon Johnson has just committed some outrageous escalation of the war, so we call for a mass demonstration at the United Nations building in New York City. But I notice there is a different demonstration going on next to us. I see Israeli flags. The demonstration is about the Six-Day War. I'm curious, so I take off my Vietnam peace buttons and I go to the other demonstration. There's a fellow listening to the radio. He shouts with joy, "We've just taken the old city," meaning East Jerusalem. I feel completely alienated. I had come that day to denounce a war, not to celebrate one. Who the hell were these people? Up to that point, I thought all Jews were liberal, tolerant, and peaceful. We were fighters for equal rights for blacks and supporters of labor. What was this arrogance I was hearing? It was awakening for me.
And then after the 1973 war, I was like, okay, so they're going to give back the occupied territories. And it grew on me over the time that that wasn't going to happen. The state of Israel had no intention of ever giving up any of that territory. And that what they were doing was acting the way states all act. They protect their territory, they protect what they see as their interests, they attack who they see as their enemies.
Zionism and Jewish nationalism have co-opted the Jewish narrative and totally dominated Jewish community to the detriment, obviously, of Palestinians, and also corrupts what our historical moment of how it's defined as what it means to be Jewish.
In Germany, I should have worn a Jewish star around my neck as I walked the streets in my army uniform.
Andy, I have a question. Is it difficult to talk about your background?
No, I'm personally very proud of my Jewish heritage. I'm very, very proud of the work of progressive Jews such as Jewish Voice for Peace. It's not easy standing up to the central authorities in this country, in the US government, in the Jewish community that follow a line that has failed to bring peace to the Middle East. We are outspoken in our belief that a change in US policy is fundamental. The shipping of arms to Israel at a time when it occupies another country, when it occupies the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, is unacceptable. It's a violation of the US arms export law. We should not be shipping arms to countries that are involved in human rights violations, such as Israel. There is a definite hostility in some synagogues to any questioning of Israeli foreign policy or any expressions of solidarity or support for the plight of the Palestinians. There also have been people who have expressed sympathy, who have told us that they are a little afraid to speak out in their synagogues for fear of retribution, but they understand and support our cause. Veterans who've served in the armed forces have a particular legitimacy when they speak out on issues of war and peace. So we believe that American Jews have a particular legitimacy when they raise questions about Israeli policy.
Is Jewish Voice for Peace in touch with our Minnesota Arab communities, Islamic communities?
We have connections with them. We have attended their demonstrations, and we are fraternal. Some of us have attended mosques. There's no doubt about it. The personal contact is absolutely basic.
Make it not about politics, but make it personal, about human beings, human lives, human suffering, because that is really what's at the core of this for me.
In the name of decency, in the name of humanity, Just like at Passover, we split the matzah in two to share it, so the land of the Holy Land can be shared. We believe it's in the interests of people, and we are confident that with time, a peaceful resolution will come. We believe our efforts to pressure the United States government to stop its $3 billion of military aid to Israel while it occupies another country can be very helpful in that effort.
Palestine is the place where a girl broke my heart for the first time, and also where for the first time one didn't. I used to go to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I played Irish music in a band. I read a lot of science fiction. I got drunk in parks and watched movies and went to a couple of protests. One year I even got an A in math. Palestine is the place I grew up in. Because I was Jewish, I had a more or less normal childhood. But a few miles away, people weren't having normal childhoods. They still aren't. Maybe many of them are not having any kind of childhood at all, due to being shot or bombed or tortured or driven out of their homes. Judaism tells me that as societies, we are collectively responsible for what we do. I don't think you need Judaism to understand that, but it is very central to our stories and our moral universe. I never shot anybody or demolished a Palestinian home. I didn't even know when my family was having a picnic in the JNF forest on Independence Day, along with hundreds or thousands, tens of thousands of other families, that the big stones we were sitting on, that the fire pits were built out of, used to be the homes of people who are still in refugee camps. Good cops shouldn't be blamed for what bad cops do, but we are all a part of a society that is built on the top of a mountain of pain and theft and death, and we are responsible for every bit of it because it's ours. Israel isn't lurching rightward as a consequence of being taken over by a fringe of settler lunatics. It has always been a society of settlers and soldiers. No matter how many beards and kippahs people wear, Israeli society has replaced God with the state and the army. It is a society that has sanctified not the Holy Land, but the possession of land. The Jewish virtues, wisdom, charity, and hard work are for suckers. The Israeli virtues are knowing how to point a gun, shoot it, and get away with it. We mustn't let them get away with it.
The recent decision of the president not to meet with Netanyahu indicates that there is serious concern at the direction of the Israeli government. The president has spoken out on settlements, and these are hopeful signs, but we need to follow up the words with action.
Are you pessimistic or optimistic?
You know, the future of the world, the future of peace in the Middle East is in the hand of the young. And young people do not necessarily carry the burdens of their parents and previous generations. Basically, I am an optimist. And the reason I'm an optimist may have to do with being a little older. I remember a time when in the United States, there was no opposition to something called the war in Vietnam. And through the actions of a dedicated population, mainly of young people, this country slowly moved away from support for the Vietnam War to a point where it became imperative that the U.S. get out. That was done through years and years of work, agitation, education. There was a time not long ago when absolutely nothing could be said against the Israeli government in this country, when there was no awareness of the plight of Palestinians. Today, there are Palestine Solidarity Committees in many, many campuses, in many cities. There are organizations such as J Street and Jewish Voice for Peace and others that are working to change things.
How do people get in touch with Jewish Voice for Peace?
The best way is to look at our Facebook page. You can simply go to Facebook and search for Jewish Voice for Peace Minnesota. And we also have an email address, minnesota@jewishvoiceforpeace.org. minnesota@jewishvoiceforpeace.org.
The full Jewish Voice for Peace forum is posted on Vimeo. Google search with the keywords Bill Sorum, Vimeo, Jewish Voice, and you'll find it. Democratic Visions is independently crafted by volunteers, mostly Democrats, from Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, Edina, and Bloomington.